Warm greetings, everybody. I'm Dr. Judd Newborn. I'm substituting for Olivia Mattis today as host for this revelatory film and program, Lioness, Golda Meir and the Nation of Israel. As you'll find out soon from today's distinguished moderator, Dr. Shula Reinhartz, we have with us the perfect guest panelists, author Francine Klagsbrun, whose book, Lioness, Golda Meir and the Nation of Israel, won the National Jewish Book Award in 2017. And we also have Annette Miller, the acclaimed stage and film actress who has played the role of Golda Meir in deeply moving performances. But first, Olivia has asked me to introduce myself fully for those who may be new to this program. I think this will also give you some insight into why I and so many of our other guests are so devoted to the Sousa Mendes Foundation. I am the founding historian emeritus and a co-creator for New York's Holocaust Museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage. I was awarded my doctorate with distinction by the University of Chicago after 3 years of adventurous fieldwork in Germany and Eastern Europe in my effort as a cultural anthropologist to reveal the underlying German cultural meanings of the Holocaust. During this period, I hunted down former SS officers to interview, and in the spirit of the Sousa Mendes Foundation's mission, I volunteered to work undercover in Poland for Poland's Solidarity Freedom Movement during communist martial law. Again, in accord with our mission, I'm also co-author of Sophie Scholl and the White Rose, about the iconic German students who gave their lives calling out against the destruction of German freedom and the mass murder of Europe's Jews. In fact, I've been working to develop the first Hollywood feature film on the White Rose with several Academy Award-winning filmmakers. Another current project right now is producing a new animated short film with an Academy Award and Emmy-winning team titled Hidden Light. Its purpose? To fight the troubling surge of anti-Semitism and lack of Holocaust awareness among school children, and even more troubling among many of their teachers today. I can tell you about that if you contact me directly via Olivia and the Foundation. Finally, I'm a dramatic multimedia lecturer on unique stories of Jewish and non-Jewish, not anti-Nazi resistance and their relationship to today's most pressing current events. So please see my website, juddnewborn.com, or contact me through Olivia and the Foundation to find out more about these inspiring lecture programs. And that's far more than enough about me. Now, of course, the acclaimed Sousa Mendes Foundation, with its unmatchable YouTube library of well over 100 trenchant and unique one-hour programs, like the one today, is named in honor of the Portuguese diplomat Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who saved the lives of thousands of refugees, for which he paid a heavy personal price. Forgotten for decades, in a sense, but thanks to the foundation, he is now an inspirational hero in Portugal and throughout the world. In fact, today we finally have the Sousa Mendes Museum in Portugal, just singled out by the New York Times in 2025 as among the top new attractions to visit in Europe. So congratulations to all of you, our supporters in the USA and around the globe. And here's a great opportunity. Teachers or others among you wanting to deepen your knowledge of rescue and resistance during the Holocaust and the value of moral courage can visit the museum too by applying to the Sousa Mendes Foundation's excellent Summer Educators Institute in Portugal, with many distinguished guest speakers, film screenings, and workshops, as well as a fascinating historical journey throughout Portugal itself and its centuries of Jewish history. Now, before I introduce our moderator, let's talk just briefly about the film we've just seen that has kicked off this program, Golda's War Diaries. It was only in 2023, 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, that Israel's National Archive finally declassified detailed files previously unknown to the public concerning Prime Minister Golda Meir's handling of the Yom Kippur War. For so many decades after Egypt and Syria's surprise attack on Israel in 1973, Golda Meir's prior fabled popularity plummeted among Israelis. Perhaps believing she could do almost anything, as a deftly pragmatic and fiercely protective leader, as well as world-renowned pioneer as a woman prime minister, Israelis believed her judgment had failed her, and the entire nation, leaving them with an excruciating number of killed and maimed men and women soldiers. And the feeling for the first time within many years that the Jewish state, which repeatedly had triumphed over almost impossible odds, was in fact more vulnerable than they had come to believe. Golda never really fought this perception of her supposed failure. She never really tried to justify herself. Instead, traumatized by it all, she resigned her post, stricken with guilt and in deep mourning. The film Golda's War Diaries reveals that Golda ultimately saved Israel from the clutches of defeat, bringing about its victory, and in fact ultimately paving the way for the unprecedented peace agreement with Egypt 5 years later. How sad that Golda herself didn't live to see herself justified in the eyes of the public. But despite it all, the girl who had escaped from the pogroms of Russia to become a world leader of the greatest stature remains a legendary figure in Jewish and global history.
50 שנה אחרי מלחמת יום הכיפורים, ארכיון המדינה חושף לראשונה את יומני הלשכה של גולדה מאיר. ומראים תמונה חדשה לגבי התפקוד של גולדה.
זה מציג אותה באור אחר לגמרי, בוודאי.
רואים מתוך הטקסטים, היא לוקחת אחריות ומבינה שעכשיו המערכה היא שלה.
את היומנים לאורך כל ימי המלחמה כתב ראש הלשכה, אלי מזרחי. זה האיש היה עד להחלטות ולדיונים שנערכו מאחורי הקלעים באחת המלחמות הקשות בתולדות ישראל.
הוא ב6 באוקטובר בבוקר, באמצע הצום של יום הכיפורים, מבין שמתרחש פה משהו גדול. והוא מוציא מחברת, מתחיל לרשום הכל.
אין יותר דרמטי מזה. לכן היומנים האלו הוגדרו סודיים ביותר, והיו אסורים בפרסום. עד היום.
אנחנו מוקפים, בפירוש המילה מוקפים.
אזרחי ישראל, היום, בסמוך לשעה 2 אחרי הצהריים, פתחו צבאות מצרים וסוריה בהתקפה נגד ישראל.
היא פלדה בזמן שהכל סביבה קורס.
כולם סביבה היו גברים. לעמוד נגד זה, להגיד, אני יודעת יותר טוב מכם, זה בלתי אפשרי בכלל.
אני חושב שאילו דיין היה במקומה, הוא היה נשבר.
האם גולדה ניהלה נכון את המלחמה?
אין ספק שהמנהיגות שלה בזמן המלחמה נתנה לצבא להגיע למרב ההישגים שהוא הגיע.
איזו משמעות הייתה להחלטות שקיבלה?
ההחלטות שלה תרמו תרומה מכרעת לדרך שבה הסתיימה המלחמה.
האם יכולה הייתה למנוע את המלחמה, שגבתה את חייהם של יותר מ-2,600 חיילים?
יש הוכחות ברורות שהיא הביאה להיכנס למשא ומתן עם מצרים.
בסיום המלחמה אז ענתה גולדה למי שהטיחו בה את האשמות הכבדות ואמרה, יבוא יום, חבל שאני כבר לא אהיה אז, אבל יבוא יום ויפתחו את הארכיונים, ואפשר יהיה לפרסם את הכל.
So now it is my privilege to introduce today's moderator, our own beloved Dr. Shulamit Reinhartz, who has lent us her expertise through numerous programs in the past. Dr. Reinhartz is, of course, the Jacob Batovsky Professor Emerita of Sociology at Brandeis University. While at Brandeis, she created a graduate program in women's studies, as well as the Hadassah Brandeis Institute for the study of the intersection between Jews and gender. Dr. Reinhartz is also the author or editor of 16 books, including her recent 100 Jewish Brides, Stories from Around the World, and another important new contribution to the history of Jews in the Holocaust, around which we shaped a program not long ago, Hiding in Holland, a resistance memoir. Greetings, Shula. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Judd. Golda Meir was an iconic Jewish woman of the 20th century. Like many other Jewish women, Golda immigrated from country to country, in her case, Ukraine, the USA, and Israel. As a modern woman, she had only 2 children because she understood that her work was as necessary to her as motherhood. She was modern also in deciding to live separately from her husband without divorcing him. As a sexually liberated woman, Golda had numerous male lovers. As an ambitious woman, she obtained positions of power, always for the sake of serving her people. And as a courageous, clever, and decisive woman, she knew how to stand her ground and even manipulate heads of state. Golda's War Diaries, the marvelous film we saw before today's show, focused on how Golda coped with and managed the Yom Kippur War, as revealed in the archives opened after 50 years. But there was much more to Golda, and we are fortunate to be able to learn from the prize-winning biographer Francine KlagSbrun about additional challenges in Golda's life. And finally, in today's program, we will meet the great actor Annette Miller, who portrayed Golda in the one-woman play Golda's Balcony. Olivia Mattis, the founder of the Susan Mendes Foundation, asked me to start today's program with a few personal thoughts regarding Golda and her impact on me. Here's my first thought. In 2012, I was invited to visit Kiev, Ukraine, where I saw affixed on a building a large plaque with an image of Golda. Here is the image. Along with two others, done by two other artists, Golda was a very frequent model for images of her face. Because of the plaque, I assumed that the citizens of Kiev admired her, but it turns out that the plaque was paid for by Jewish donors, not from Kiev. Next, after downtown Kiev, I went to the horrible pit, which has been filled over, called Babi Yar, meaning grandmother's ravine, because grandmothers used to do their laundry there. Babi Yar is located only a few minutes bus ride from downtown Kiev. I thought, thank God, Golda's family left Kiev for the U.S. in 1906 when she was 8 years old. In 1941, when she was 35, the invading Nazis marched the entire Jewish community of Kiev to Babi Yar, and in 2 days murdered 34,000 men, women, and children. Had Golda not been able to leave Kiev earlier, she would almost certainly have been murdered and thrown into the chasm. In 1969, when Golda was in her second month in office, and I was in Israel for the year, she made her famous assertion that there is no such thing as Palestinians. I thought, she is so out of touch with reality. She can't just will people out of existence. As an American who went to college during the civil rights era, I couldn't understand why she would say such a thing. I felt alienated from her. In 1973, my husband and I moved to Jerusalem in the beginning of the summer, planning to stay until late December. That year, Yom Kippur fell on Shabbat, October 6th, so it was doubly holy, Shabbat and Yom Kippur. As you may know, Jews who don't go to shul on Yom Kippur typically stroll outside in Israel or ride their bikes on the street because there are no cars on the roads. There was an eerie silence, not the sound of traffic. On that Yom Kippur, all was silent. And now we'll see a video of what that looked like. Suddenly, when my husband and I heard sirens breaking the silence, we knew something was amiss. In a surprise coordinated attack, Syria in the north and Egypt in the south crossed into Israel simultaneously. A month earlier, my husband had volunteered to serve in the army, but the recruiters didn't want him. They said, no need. No one expected this war. Not the citizens, not the government, not even the army. I didn't even know if there was a shelter in our small building. With the sirens blaring, I went out to the porch of our apartment and saw a young woman with 3 children standing on their porch opposite me. Then I saw a man in uniform leaving her building. The children called out to him over and over, Shalom, Abba, Shalom, Shalom, Abba, Shalom. The father did not look up. He did not look back. He did not wave to his children and wife. I assume he didn't want to break his heart. A few nights later, we watched Golda on TV trying to console and inspire the nation. What actually brought us comfort was images of young American Jews coming to the aid of Israel by volunteering, fundraising, and engaging in political activism. My husband and I covered our windows with blackout material. I called my doctor to confirm an appointment. His assistant said the doctor had suspended his practice because his son had been killed on the Golan. I volunteered in a bakery and as an entertainer for children. Unlike the previous war that had lasted 6 days, the Yom Kippur War lasted from October 6th until October 25th, 1973, for a total of 19 days, not even 3 weeks. It felt like 19 months. When the war ended, people looked for a scapegoat. It became Moshe Dayan and Golda Meir. As Prime Minister, Golda was blamed for being unprepared for the surprise attack and for the heavy casualties. When my husband and I returned to the United States in late December, I was still so shaken up by the Yom Kippur War that I was unable to sleep and decided to go into therapy. Thankfully, I am no longer traumatized and actually go to Israel regularly. Golda died of lymphatic cancer 5 years later at the age of 80. She was buried in Jerusalem on Mount Herzl, where Israeli heads of state are laid to rest. I am going to Israel this Pesach. I will visit Golda's grave and tell her that the declassification of her papers after 50 years has helped restore her dignity and her place in history and my great respect. And now for our speakers. Francine KlagSbrun is a historian and journalist whose in-depth biography, Lioness, Golda Meir and the Nation of Israel, won the National Jewish Book Award of 2017 as Book of the Year. Her latest biography, after having written about Golda, is Henrietta Szold, Hadassah and the Zionist Dream, published in 2024. Ms. Klagsbrun's writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Newsweek, and Ms. magazine. Francine Klagsbrun was the first woman to carry a Torah to the Western Wall, the first woman in history, as part of her participation in the activist group Women of the Wall. Our final speaker, Annette Miller, has performed on Broadway, off-Broadway, in film and television as an actor. In 2024, she received a special citation for her performances of such strong women as Golda Meir, Martha Mitchell, and Maria Callas. In 2020, the Wall Street Journal named her Best Actor in Regional Theater. For 20 seasons, Annette Miller has been a leading performer at Shakespeare & Company in Lenox, Massachusetts, and I have seen every one of her performances. Annette originated the role of Golda Meir in Golda's Balcony, for which she received several Best Actor awards. And now, Francine Klagsbrun.
Thank you so much, Shula. I'm delighted to be here and part of this exciting program. Here is the cover of the jacket of my biography of Golda Meir. There are two things involved. The title, Lioness. Golda was a lioness, like a female lion, looking out fiercely for her cubs. She was concerned about Jews wherever they lived, in Israel, in the United States, in Russia. And the other thing about that jacket is there is Golda smoking a cigarette. She was a chain smoker. She would finish one cigarette, put it out, take the next cigarette, and she loved Chesterfields. Next slide, please. In the 1970s, Golda Meir became a hero, an icon for the women's movement of which I was a part. She herself was not a feminist. She saw herself and wanted to be seen as a leader, not a woman leader. She didn't want to narrow her horizons, as she said, being involved only in women's issues. But for the women's movement, she was a hero. She was one of the few women who was the head of a state in any country. She was the fourth Prime Minister of Israel. She would be the only female Prime Minister of Israel to date. And of course, we do not have a woman who is president of the United States yet. Every time a woman applied for a job in those days, no matter how high level the job was, she would be asked, "But can you type?" And so this poster, which was circulated widely, was sort of making fun of that. Here she is, Prime Minister, but can she type? Golda was born in Kiev. Golda Mavovich is her name. Her father was a carpenter, never very successful. Her mother was a real go-getter. Her older sister, Shana, was somebody she admired all of her life. Even when she was Prime Minister, she wanted Shana's approval. Her younger sister, Clara, was also known as Tzippi, and was the only member of the family who did not go to the land of Israel, but lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, all of her life. The family stayed in Kiev until 1902, and Golda and her mother and her sisters were there and moved to Pinsk after a while. But her father went to the United States in 1902. Pinsk was threatened by pogroms, and they were very worried. So in 1906, the entire family went to America, settled in Milwaukee with her father. Golda was a fine student. She had excellent grades in high school. She wanted to go on to become a teacher. She wanted to go to teachers' college. That was too much education for a girl, her parents thought, and they lined up an older man for her to marry. So Golda ran away from home, and she ran to her sister Shana's home in Denver, Colorado, where Shana had married now to a man named Shammai Korngold. And Shana's home became sort of a meeting place for intellectuals, many of them immigrants. And there Golda heard discussions she had never heard before about women's issues, about politics, about philosophy, and it opened her mind. And she also met a man named Morris Meyerson, who was not interested in politics, but in the arts, in literature, in painting, in music especially. And Golda fell in love with him, and the two were married in 1917 when Golda was 19 and he was 24. Golda was very involved in those days and with the Poalei Zion, which was the forerunner of the later Labor Party. And she is seen in this photograph sitting next to her close friend, Yosel Kapolov, and her very closest friend, Regina Hamburger, who made Aliyah later, who went to the land of Israel when Golda did. And behind Golda is her husband, Morris Meyerson. Golda insisted that the couple move to the land of Israel. Morris was not a Zionist like Golda, but he, of course, followed his wife. And she was they settled in the kibbutz Merchavia, and she was put in charge of the chicken coops. And she was so successful, she figured out a system of raising more chickens, which meant more eggs, which meant more money for the kibbutz. And she loved that. She became known throughout the country. She attended conferences. She spoke at meetings. She always spoke in Yiddish. But there she did very well. Morris hated kibbutz life. Golda loved it. Morris contracted malaria, and after 2 years they left and they settled in Jerusalem. They had 2 children, Menachem, their son, and Sarah, their daughter. And they were so poor that Golda had to take in wash from nearby schools in order to just feed her children. And then a man named David Remez, who had heard about Golda, offered her a job as head of the Women's Workers' Council. And she accepted that. And that meant moving with her children to Tel Aviv and leaving Morris. And that was the beginning of their separation, which later became more formal. They never got divorced, but that marriage was a failure. But Golda and David Remez became lovers. He was one of several lovers Golda had, but I believe really the love of her life. And that's where Golda lived, in Tel Aviv. Now, years went by, and the State of Israel was declared in 1948. When the State of Israel was declared, Golda was made the ambassador to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union at that time was a friend of Israel. It had recognized Israel along with the United States very early on, but it did not allow its Jews to have anything to do with Israel, even to practice their Judaism. They were very much repressed. When Golda was there, she prayed and attended services at the Choral Synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And when she came out after the services, thousands, perhaps 50,000 Jews crowded around her, throwing caution to the wind. Golda, they said, gold in you. They tried to touch her. And all she could think to say with tears in her eyes was, thank you for having remained Jewish. Many of those Jews were then arrested and put into jail. Golda became, in 1949, part of Ben-Gurion, who became the Prime Minister of Israel. Golda became part of his cabinet. She was the labor minister, the only woman in the cabinet at that time and for a long time afterwards. In this photograph, David Ben-Gurion, who was prime minister, sitting way at the end of the table. 2 seats next to him, under the portrait of Theodore Herzl, is David Remez, Golda's lover. But sitting right behind Golda is another lover, Zalman Shazar, who was at that time editor of Davar, the most important newspaper in Israel. In Israel. He had become Israel by then. In Israel, and later he would become the 3rd president of Israel. In 1956, Golda was made foreign minister of Israel, and David Ben-Gurion changed her name from Golda. We had Golda Mabovich, then Golda Meir when she married, and now she became Golda Meir. He wanted all the people in his cabinet to have Hebraicized names, and Meir means illuminated. Sitting next to her is David Ben-Gurion on one side and Zalman Shazar, a lover, on the other side. Next slide, please. As foreign minister, Golda, she was named foreign minister at that time. As foreign minister, Golda met with all sorts of important people, among them Eleanor Roosevelt. The two would have coffee and tea together whenever Golda was in town. She met with President Kennedy at his home in Palm Beach, Florida. Kennedy said something to her that no other president had said to anyone from Israel, and that is that the United States has a special relationship with Israel that it has with no other country except for Great Britain. And if anything were to happen to Israel, the United States would have its back. Golda also spent a great deal of time with her General Moshe Dayan, who had lost an eye during the Second World War and always wore a patch over one eye, and they became very close and worked together very closely. And those days also, Israel was helping the emerging African states, who were new countries were emerging from Africa, and Israel helped them to gain friends and also just to help them. And Golda spent a great deal of time in Africa. Among other things, she taught the Torah to many African women. Golda retired in 1966 and became the secretary of the Mapai, the Labor Party. In 1967, Israel fought its Six-Day War, preempted the Arabs. They conquered vast territories, and among other things, it united Jerusalem. Golda visited Jerusalem 2 days after the war and had an emotional meeting with the soldiers there. In 1969, Golda was nominated to be Prime Minister of Israel. She cried when she heard her name mentioned. She remembered herself as this little girl from Pinsk who had been afraid of pogroms, and now she was going to be head of the sovereign state of Israel. As head of state, Golda reviewed the troops, as any head of state would. She always wore her perfect little dress, little jacket, little dress, but her shoes, her very comfortable shoes, became known as Golda shoes, and she always carried a great, capacious pocketbook with her. Next slide, please. She also met with President Nixon. He had a big reception for her. He liked her. He said she was different than other women who headed state. She didn't want to be treated specially as a woman. Later, Nixon would help Israel in its war in Yom Kippur by sending an airlift with all sorts of airplanes and all sorts of ammunition for the country. Anwar Sadat became the president of Egypt, and he demanded that Israel return all the territories it had conquered in 1967. Golda was not a greater Israel person. She didn't mind returning territories, but she wanted something in exchange. It was called Land for Peace. She would give back the land if the Arab states would recognize Israel and have peace with them. Sadat did not want that. He kept threatening war. Golda was very nervous. She had this gut feeling that things were not good and that war would come. But her generals, including Moshe Dayan, reassured her time and again that there was a low probability of war, and Israel was so strong, even if there was war, they would defeat the Arabs in no time at all. And then on Yom Kippur, 1973, on October 6th, the Arab states, Egypt and Syria, attacked Israel. Israel was taken by surprise. And even though Golda had that gut feeling, she was held responsible for that war. And she was devastated by the war. She said, I will never again be the person I was before this war. But she was a rock throughout. She held the country together. She made military decisions that ended with Israel winning the war. But there was a very bad feeling in the country, and it remained until this day practically, a vulnerability, because they had been taken by surprise. They had lost 2,600 soldiers. Golda visited the wounded during and after the war. She loved the Israeli soldiers. She called them my boys, and she was devastated by it. She visited them in the troops on the front, on the lines, during a ceasefire. They were very impressed with her. And again, she was very loving toward them, but devastated by this war. In 1966, she resigned as prime minister, taking responsibility for the war, even though it was the generals who had assured her that there would be no war. Even though she resigned and retired, she continued to be involved in things that were going on, to be engaged in whatever was going on in Israel. She met with Margaret Thatcher, another very powerful woman who had become Prime Minister of England, and the two got along beautifully. And then in 1977, when Anwar Sadat came to Israel to make peace with Menachem Begin, who was now the Prime Minister of Israel, Golda attended meetings, and she stole the show. You know, I know you always called me an old lady, she said to Anwar Sadat, and he roared with laughter. And she gave him a little gift for his new granddaughter. He gave her a silver cigarette case for herself, and the two enemies now became friends. Golda died in 1978, and now finally her reputation is being revived and raised again, and she is seen once more as one of the great leaders of Israel.
Hi, Francine, and hi, everyone. Thanks for making me part of this talk about finally the War Diaries. And it was great for me to see it, because you see, the play Golda's balcony is really about what was going on in Golda's mind. She does certainly go back in her history, but the key point was, what was that balcony? And it was in Dimona. And it was there that the Israelis had built, since 1956, they began building that, a nuclear plant. And it was a big secret. But there it was in Dimona. And Golda reveals what it was like, that plant was like, because we're at the moment in a play where Golda is about to make an important decision, whether in fact to use the nuclear bombs that they had been building. So she says, we built it all underground. The Americans were flying U-2s over it, and we didn't want to be vetoed by the great powers. They knew something was going on. Suddenly, the desert was fenced in, alive with bulldozers and cranes, new roads, hundreds of workers and their families, much too much housing. We said it was a desalination plant. For 10 years, the construction went on, out of sight, in the hole that we dug hundreds of feet down into the earth. 5 underground levels with lead walls, workers in sealed suits, robots, dangerous, do not touch, and all of it overseen from a control tower. I was on that tower so often, the men called it Golda's balcony. The view from that balcony was into hell, and I was seeing it all night long as our cabinet met. So that what was going through Golda's mind when you see the film and you see her meeting with the cabinet about what to do during these desperate times in the 73 war. What Bill Gibson was showing, and what I hope I was able to communicate, was that within this strong woman, this woman who led the country, the first prime minister, woman prime minister of Israel, and so far the last, was a strong woman that had tremendous compassion. And throughout the film that you're going to see, or that you have seen, what is going on to Bill Gibson's mind, inside her, was this line from the play: to create a world you want, how many lives are you entitled to destroy? Tell me, my hypothetical friend, in this world that you created, good and evil are like two ends of a single stick, so that you can't pick up one without the other. Why? Oh, top secret. And so that thought is on her mind as she converses to God. So this play, Golda's Balcony, was written as a one-woman show by Bill Gibson. He had written a play years before about Golda, about the history of Israel, actually. He was always fascinated by strong women. And in that play, originally, there were 13 characters, all of the people, all the key players. Diane was there, Dada was on stage, Shimon Peres, Rabin. But this time, he was interested in just Golda and what was happening in her mind before that consequential event in the 1973 war. Now, it was one person, it was just me talking. There was a table in one end, that was her office. There was a small table and chair, that was her home. And the center part of it was her discussing with the audience what her past was and what she should do. Now, it was very key to this that Golda, as you will see from the images that are going to come up now before you, that Golda was dressed for the occasion, but she was not wearing a false nose. She was not wearing a wig. She did not have a swollen leg. As a matter of fact, the play's opening lines, before it was brought to Broadway, because at Broadway they were afraid the audience wouldn't have enough of an imagination, the opening lines to the play were, "No wig, no false nose, no swollen leg. Use your imagination. Golda Meir for tonight." And at which point I then stepped into her shoes, which I asked for because you cannot do Golda without physically stepping into her shoes. And then my director, Daniel Gedron, who knew Golda, he was Israeli, said, "You must carry that bag of hers." She was known for carrying that bag, which is also mentioned, also seen in the film, and you saw Francine just mention that. And so I stepped into her shoes and picked up her bag and became Golda and began with her story. Golda was a magnificent speaker, and at the beginning of the 1948 war, Ben-Gurion told the cabinet he needed to go to the States and ask for money because he needed money for tanks, ammunition, and of which they didn't have enough money for. Even though he could get the tanks from Czechoslovakia, he could get the guns, but he needed the money. And so he said he was going to leave, and she said, no, don't go to the States. Look, she said, you're needed here. I will go to the States. Don't forget, she said to him, I speak a good American. Of course, she came from Milwaukee. So she convinced him to let her go and speak to the fundraisers in New York. So here she is, preparing to go to Chicago. She says, I learned that our best fundraiser was in Chicago. The Council for Jewish Federations was meeting there. Palestine wasn't even in their minds. These men controlled the fundraising machinery of America for Jewish welfare, temples, hospitals. So I went to Chicago. The chairman of that hall said, friends, we have with us today an unexpected visitor from Palestine who asked for a few words, Mrs. Golda Meir. I said, I have no speech. I'll tell you what's in my heart. 54 days ago, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine, a Jewish state, an Arab state. 33 nations for, 13 against. It wasn't the real vote. 6 million Jews crying out of the graveyards of Europe cast the real vote. I didn't come to the States to save 750,000 Jews after we lost 6 million. But if the 750,000 Jews are lost now, we are through with the dream of a Jewish state. When the British pull out, 5 nations wait to massacre us. If we have arms to fight with, we'll fight with them. If not, we'll fight with stones. The question is, how much can we get immediately? I don't mean next month. I mean now. Within a very short period of time, we must have, for cash, $25 million. You have 2 choices. We have only one. You cannot decide whether we will fight or not. We will. That decision is made. You can only decide one thing, whether we will live. And I beg you, do not be bitterly sorry 3 months from today for what you failed to do now. Yes, they were moved to the bottom of their pocketbooks. Such money we had never seen. For 6 weeks, I spoke like that to Jews all over the country. And when I left, I raised $50 million. $50 million, Ben-Gurion said. Golda, he said, when history is written, it will say it was a Jewish woman got the money that made the state possible. For guns, yes. I begin with the redemption of the human race and end up in the munitions business. So you see, that was part of the power that Golda had to move people, to get people behind her Zionist dream. And if it weren't for that, in fact, who knows if there would have been enough money to buy the arms to save the Jewish state back in 1948. She resigned after the war because she said that sending boys off to war and losing them was the worst thing she had to do. But she said, if I can't do it, let someone who can. And so that was what Bill's play was about. The strength of this woman, what she had to do, where she had to go to get her dream accomplished. And she had the power, she had the dignity to resign because she felt that she couldn't bear with living with how many boys were lost. And she took responsibility, even though it was she who led the war effort, not her generals who collapsed during the war. Thanks. Thanks, Francine. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Shula, Francine, Annette. That was just wonderful. Now, here are 2 terrific upcoming events for all of you to pay attention to. First, you should all know that on Thursday, January 29th, the Susa Mendez Foundation has arranged a fascinating panel discussion and reception at the Center for Jewish History in Manhattan at 16th Street and 5th Avenue. We're doing this in conjunction with the revelatory new exhibition at the UN itself, which we are co-sponsoring, Between Life and Death, Stories of Rescue During the Holocaust. Our special event starts at 6 p.m. and is free for all, whether in person or by Zoom, but you must register first. So please, go to our website for more information. You won't want to miss this. And now, folks, listen to this. This coming Sunday, January 25th, we have an absolutely spectacular film and program for you. For me, as a Holocaust scholar, I'd long known the brief but almost fanciful account by survivors about the dancer, an unnamed woman who was said to have killed an SS guard on her way to the gas chambers. Well, it wasn't just a legend. The actual identity of that extraordinary fabled woman has finally been identified as Francesca Mann, a Polish-Jewish ballerina and Holocaust hero who became an instant legend. Commanded to undress on her way to the gas chamber, she performed a striptease dance for the Nazi guard, seized his gun, and shot him dead. Her brazen act inspired resistance among other prisoners. The film you'll see first, Francesca, tells her amazing story. I can't wait to see it.
You ever hear the name Francesca Meir?
He stayed in front of her at the gas chamber, told her to undress herself.
She grabbed his gun. He's dead. Guess how? Yiddish maidel killed him.
ברחובות השתוללו יום-יום טרור, צפיפות, אימה.
Tak było cały czas giecie warszawskie.
איך אפשר ללכת לתיאטרון בזמן שהגוויות מציפות את המדרכות?
Chodziłem po trupach do teatru. Po trupach.
בעולם התיאטרון, עולם קסום.
Każdy chciał za ostatni grosz zakopać. Getto tańczy. Getto chce żyć.
היה ביקוש מטורף להופעות של הרקדנית פרנצ'ישקה מאן.
סיפרו לנו שהייתה שחקנית.
She was working in a nightclub.
יש שמועות על זה שהיא שיתפה פעולה. אין שחור ולבן, יש הרבה אפור.
גבולתה של האישה היהודייה הפכה לאגדה, למיתוס. I began this part of the program, remarks earlier in the program, by saying that Golda was an iconic woman, an iconic Jewish woman of the 20th century. And I'd just like to make another comment about that. Not so much about Golda, but about Francine and Annette. Here we have two people, two brilliant women, Francine as an historian, journalist, and writer, and Annette as a fabulous actress. They chose as a topic to deal with another fabulous woman, Golda Meir. This could only have happened since 1960 or so, when the women's movement in the United States and the rest of the world decided it was time to understand women's lives. There are not enough biographies of the great women of Israel, such as Shulamit Aloni, who focused on civil rights and human rights. It is marvelous that Francine and Annette have given us excellent material about the two women, the same woman seen from various sides. And I am very happy to have been part of this movement in my own work to bring to life women's lives. Thank you.
Well, folks, thank you for so much. I have some final thoughts to share with you about today's program, and they may answer a major question that you may have in your mind still. For the most part, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes among those making crucial decisions at the center of government and politics, particularly in times of crisis. But that, of course, is what our ethical journalists are for, just as it is our responsibility ourselves to push for transparency and keep the protective structures built into democracy intact. In Golda's case, it seems she endured an injustice for what she herself and the Israeli powers deemed necessary, to keep the details of their intelligence failures secret, as well as such secret meetings as King Hussein of Jordan's visit to warn Golda of an impending attack, as well as to maintain the cover of implanted spies. But another major reason was to protect their own reputations, hiding their initial panic and indecision so as not to undermine a vulnerable public's morale and confidence in their government. If some weren't sure of it before, we now know more than ever that Golda Meir was a human being, not a superwoman, yet a woman of great strength, always acting for her deep sense of compassion, morality, and the well-being of her people, and not for self-aggrandizement and unbridled power at the expense of the people and the democracy they stand for. And so Golda Meir emerges again as a shining light among the democratic leaders of the world. And now thank you all for sharing this part of your Sunday afternoon with us. We look forward to seeing you at our next remarkable program about Francesca, the heroic ballerina. And don't forget to register online to attend in person or by Zoom our Thursday, January 29th special reception and panel at New York Center for Jewish History. See you next weekend. Bye-bye.